How's it going, everyone? In today's video we're going to be creating this cool and interactive website using the React.js framework. Before we get started with the video, guys, I just want to mention that this video is sponsored by Hostingo, one of the best web hosting platforms around. We're actually going to be deploying our project on the Hostingo platform at the end of the video. Hostingo as a service have always got really great deals on. They offer a free domain name when signing up for premium. They have 24/7 customer support, really easy and free website migration, a 30-day money-back guarantee, as well as a host of other perks and benefits for affordable prices. So click on the link in the description and use the code CODELAB at checkout. You also get an additional 10% off when using that code. So more on Hostingo later when we go and deploy our website. Let's actually get back to our project. Alright guys, so before we dive into the code, let's just take a quick look at the website we're going to be creating today and go over all of its dynamic features. So as you can see here at the top, we've got our nav bar, which has a cool little logo and some links. And these links, when we hover over them, have this cool little animation. For the landing page here, you can see we've got a big title, the surf, and then we've got a little subtitle here with a video playing in the background. And then we've also got this little hover animation of an arrow, which is just pointing to the next part of our website. So if we scroll down, you can see it's just an about us section. So it's just got some titles here, a button, and then a little animation on the actual image here. So you can see it just animates inside the square box. And then underneath that, you can see I've kind of created this sort of wave effect to cut off to the next section, which I think is just, quite fitting for the theme of the website, and I think it looks pretty cool. And then we scroll down, see we have the destination section with all the cards. So each of the cards here just has a destination of where people can surf. So we've got Australia, Hawaii, Maldives and Portugal. And this also has like an animation effect when we hover over this. And then if we actually click on the read more section, it actually opens up a modal for us. So we just have a little bit more information about that specific destination. So if we click on this, we can see it shows Hawaii. So if we want to look at the Maldives, it shows the Maldives. And then underneath the destinations, you can see we have a section for, like almost like a newsletter section, or like signing up to become part of the team. So if we click on this actual button, you can see we can actually create an account. So a similar sort of feature that we have in the destination section, but it's going to be created for account. And then we can click on this. And this also, as you can see, has a little smooth animation. And then underneath this, we can footer section here. So I think it looks pretty cool. And the whole thing is responsive. So if I shrink this down, you can see the cards stack on top of each other. Everything looks nice and neat. You can see everything's all centered. All the text fits to size. You can see we also have a hamburger menu, which I can click on, and it will just show us the nav bar, but on a side view. So that's the project we're going to be creating in this tutorial. Let's now dive into the code and start creating this website. Just a few prerequisites before we get started on this project. You will need a good understanding of HTML. You also need a good understanding of CSS, because we're going to be using it in this video quite a lot. I won't actually be writing any of it out. We're just going to copy and paste it from a GitHub file, which I'll explain in a moment why. And then you will also need a basic understanding of JavaScript, because we're going to be using a little bit of vanilla JavaScript as well as using JSX, which is essentially just a combination of both JavaScript and HTML, but for React. Okay, so getting started with the React is actually pretty simple. So creating a React app really quickly just requires these 3 steps. One thing to note quickly is that you will need to download the latest version of Node for this to actually run, but let's go ahead and implement these 3 actions here. So it's saying, first we need to write npx create React app, and then followed by the name of the app. So it's going to be called the surf. So that's going to begin our download. This might take a while, so I'll get back to you guys when this is completed. Alright guys, so as you can see, that's completed. If I open this up now, you can see all the files it's downloaded and all the files that we're going to be working in. But before we take a look at those files, let's just actually start our app. So it's saying that we need to first go into that folder. So we'll say cd surf. So now we're inside that folder, and then all we need to do is just run the package manager. So npm start, hit enter. And because I have this running in another port, I'm just going to run it in a different one. So I'm just going to say yes. And as you can see, we successfully compiled our website, and it's now ready for us to use and work on. So from here now, we can just go ahead and set up the rest of our content that we need. So we'll just close the terminal. We don't need that anymore. And then we'll go inside the actual files. and we'll just delete a few things. So we don't need the readme, don't need the git ignore, don't need the favicon or the logos there, or the robots text. And then inside the source, we won't need these, or set up test.js. Don't worry about those errors, we're just going to clear that up in a moment. Won't need the logo SVG or app.test. So as you can see, it's actually telling us where the errors occur. So it's saying that inside the index.js, port web vitals doesn't exist. So we'll go inside the index.js, and then we'll just get rid of this. And then for app.js, we can actually delete all of the content inside of here. We don't actually need it. And we'll also get rid of the import for the logo. And then index.js also has this function here that we don't need. So there's our blank slate that we're going to be working with now in our project. Let's also bring the finished project in here. So we've got a reference point. The first thing we're going to build is going to be the navigation bar of our website. So the way we're going to do that is first create a components folder, which is just going to store all the component functions that we're going to be using throughout this project. So let's go ahead and insert that inside of the source file. New folder, components, hit enter. And then we'll create a new file for the navbar. So we'll say navbar.jsx. Hit tab. So this is where we're going to create that function component. Close the index file, and the way we're going to insert this navbar so it displays in our blank page here is we're going to be using app.js. So this is essentially where we're going to insert all of our content. So inside of this wrapper div with a class name of app, this is going to house all of those components that we're going to be creating in this tutorial. And then what happens is that the app.js gets rendered, and then it displays all of our content inside of it. So we'll go in the navbar, and the first thing is to actually import React so we can use it. So we'll say import React from React. Go underneath this and we'll say function. We'll call it navbar, and then we'll have a return. And then inside of this return, we're going to have some JSX. Now, JSX is essentially a combination of JavaScript and HTML. And JSX actually just stands for JavaScript Syntax Extension. So essentially it's a JavaScript extension that allows us to describe React's objects using a syntax that sort of resembles a HTML template. And again, what this will allow us to do is just write JavaScript that actually looks like a HTML markup and then have it returned from a component. Now don't be too confused about that. We're going to be writing a lot of JSX in this. So by the time we finish the tutorial, you'll have a good understanding of what JSX is and confident in using it. So inside of here, we're going to have a div with a class of navigation, and you can see React is a little bit different in regards to class names. In CSS it's just class, but with React it's class name, so that's only the key difference there. So inside of our navigation div, we're going to have an anchor tag, which just isn't going to go anywhere, but this is essentially going to be our logo. It's going to have a class name of logo, and then we'll have the image. The source is going to be the images folder, which we'll create in a minute, and then it's going to have the name of sp.png, and we'll just put logo for the alt. Now underneath our logo we're going to have the nav, so this is just going to be a nav tag, the class name of navigation menu, and then inside of that we'll have a UL, which is going to have some list items, and also an anchor tag, and this is going to lead to the about. Duplicate that a few more times. We'll have one for destinations, and then there's one for the newsletter section. So that's essentially all the content we're going to need for the navigation. Now another thing I want to explain is that when we're using React, it can only render a root element, so you can't essentially return loads of different elements. All the elements must have a root element. So in this case it's navigation. Now another feature of React is that you can use a thing called React fragments, which essentially just allows us to return multiple elements from the React component by letting us group a list of children elements together. So essentially acting like a container. And the way we write a fragment is just an empty opening closing tag. Paste that in here. Personally, I think that just looks a lot cleaner. We can return as many elements inside of these fragments now as we like. And I mean, you don't have to do this. You can just use a div container class like a lot of people do. But I think, yeah, again, I think this is a lot cleaner and looks a lot and just works a bit better in my opinion. Now we actually need to export this so we can see it inside of our page here. Say export default, we'll export the navbar function. And then the way we render it is that we go inside our app.js, which is going to render all of our components. And then we're just going to import navbar from the components folder. And then all we need to do is just include it inside of our navbar there, and as you can see, there's our navbar. Obviously it looks a bit ugly right now because we haven't applied any styling, but that's essentially how we create a function component, include it in our app, and then it will render it for us in the page. And just while we're here, I'll just put these in fragments too, just to keep some consistency. So again, we import React, create our function component, insert inside the return some fragments. Inside of those fragments we have our JSX. We then export that function so we can then use it in our app.js. We import it, and then all we need to do is just include it inside of our container class. And it renders it for us on the screen. So from here now, let's go ahead and apply some styling. Now in regards to the styling for this tutorial, I'm actually not going to type out the CSS. I'm just going to copy and paste it from the GitHub file. Which I'll leave a link in the description for you guys so you guys can copy and paste that styling too. The reason being is that if I type out the CSS in this tutorial, one, it's just going to be a really long video, and two, the main focus really is about React. It's not really about the styling. So those are the reasons why we're just going to copy and paste the CSS for this project. And again, I will leave a link to the GitHub file so you guys can get that styling too. So to insert the styling, we first need to create a file for it. So we're going to create it for the navbar.css, and then what I'll do is actually just bring in that GitHub file so we can use it throughout the tutorial. So we're inside the navbar.css, we're going to grab the raw file, so all the styling for that navbar, paste that in here, and then we need to import this styling. So we'll do it inside of our navbar file, and then we'll import that CSS file. So it's called navbar.css, and then let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So there's our navigation now taking shape. There's a few things we still need to do, of course. So we still need to add that hover effect, and we also need to include our logo. So for the hover effect, these anchor tags actually have a class. So nav link and nav link line, so they have two classes. So we'll do the same for the other tags. And as you can see now, the nav links are looking pretty good, and they now also have that hover effect. So from here we need to now include our logo so we can complete our navbar. Now in regards to the logo and the rest of the images for the website, I'm just going to have an image folder which is going to have all the images inside of it. Now the images I actually acquired from Pexels, which is just a website which has a lot of nice, cool photos that you can download for free, as well as videos. I've got all my images and videos from Pexels. So if you guys want to use different images or different videos for your project, feel free to do so. Or you can just copy mine from the GitHub. So what I'll do is actually just in the public folder, create a new folder for images. Now behind the scenes, I'm going to paste the images for me to use. For you guys, it's similar. You just download the GitHub files, and it will have all those images, and then you can use those images in your project. Or again, if you want to use your own ones, feel free to do so. So as you can see, as soon as I've done that, I've pasted all the images inside of here. We can now see our logo, which we included here, and then we've also got the other images that we can use, as well as our favicon, which we'll create at the end, which just changes this little icon here to our logo, just that nice little effect that we can add instead of having the React one. So that's essentially going to be it for the navbar. We also need to work on the hamburger menu, but first let's create our landing page, and then we can focus on making it reactive with the hamburger menu. So just like we did with the images, I'm going to create another folder in the public file or folder, and then I'm just going to call this videos. And then just again, like we did in the images, I'm going to paste the video that I found in Pexels, which is also the main video of this tutorial here. So this background image of this, this background video of this surfer. Again, like in Pexels, if you want to get videos for your own content or for your own projects, feel free to do so. But again, I'm going to paste that video inside of our videos folder we just created. So if we open this up now, you can see I've pasted that video inside of our videos folder there. So now we can go ahead and use that. So because this is going to be a landing page, I'm going to create a folder for each of the pages. So this is going to have things like the destinations section, the about section, the foot section, newsletter section, and the landing page that we'll create now. So inside of the sources, we'll create a new folder. We'll call this pages, and our first page is going to be that landing page .jsx, and then we'll just make the landing page CSS file too. So just close this off. So in the landing page, we're going to follow exactly the same process as we did with the function component. We're first going to import React from React, and then it's going to be a function component. So function landing page. And then we'll have our return, which is going to return our JSX. Have our fragments, so we can store multiple elements inside of this. Then inside of this, we'll have a landing page container. So landing page container. Inside of that, we're going to have the landing page content. So all of the content inside, so the H1, the bouncing arrow that we see in the original example. So essentially all of this content here. So it's going to be wrapped around a div called landing page content, and this is going to have H1. It's called the surf. Underneath that, we'll have a H3. Just going to say good times and amazing experiences. Then underneath our landing page content, we're going to have the arrow. So this is going to have a class of arrow as well as a class of bounce, and it's actually going to be an icon that we're going to be using from Font Awesome to actually show us that arrow. But first, before we include Font Awesome, I'm just going to write the rest of the content. So we're going to include that video. So it's going to have a video file, and then we'll give it some attributes inside of this tag. So we'll say auto play, have it muted, and it's going to be on a constant loop. And let's just also give it an ID of my video. And then inside of this is where we'll have the source. So we'll have a source attribute. So we'll have a source tag, and then this is going to contain the actual source of the video. So this is going to be videos/surfing video. So then from here, what we need to do is just export this so we can see it in our app.js file. So export default landing page, and then include it inside of our app file. Oops, so first we need to actually import it. Import landing page from landing pages, and then landing page. And as you can see, there's our content. Now, of course, that looks a bit big because we haven't included the CSS yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go inside our CSS file, go in the GitHub file, and we'll grab landing page CSS, grab the raw content, copy all of this, paste that in here, and then let's include that file. So import landing page .css, and as you can see now, everything's styled correctly. It's looking pretty much exactly the same as our example here, or finished example here. We're just missing the arrow, and the text is a little bit different. So we're actually using the text from Google Fonts. So we're going to go ahead into Google Fonts now and grab that font that we're going to be using. So we'll go inside Font Awesome and grab Dancing Script, which is that font type that we're going to be using for our main content. So we'll just scroll down and grab regular 400, and then we'll copy the link, and then we'll go inside our index.html, and we don't need this content here. Change this title as well actually to surf while we're here, and then we'll paste that content inside of here, so all of that fonts that we're going to be using. So that now that should change our content. So as you can see now, it's changing that style into the surf, so it's got that font family. The next thing we want to do now is include Font Awesome, so we can show that bouncing arrow. So we'll say Font Awesome. We'll grab the CDN file, and we'll just go above the links here, paste that in here, and then we need to include that inside of our JSX. So we'll go where we had it here, and this is going to be an icon class which has the class of fa.fa-angle-down, and then we want to make it quite big, so we'll say fa-5x. As you can see now, it's looking pretty good. So we've got our navigation bar there with a nice hover effect, and then we've also got a cool sort of landing page which has a nice background video, which also has like some cool text and then a bouncing arrow. We've got this little bit of a glitch, but we'll fix that in just a moment when we build the About Us page. So let's go ahead and do that now. It probably should be called sections because we're not actually going to different pages, but it doesn't really matter too much. So let's just go ahead and create that anyway. So new file, about.jsx, and create a CSS file for it. .css. Close these off, and then we'll do the same thing as before. So we'll import React from React, have our function component, and then we'll have a return, our fragments, and then let's just take a look at what the About section actually looks like. So you can see it's actually two parts. So we've got the part on the left, which is just the text, title, and the button, and then we've got a part on the right, which is this image, which also has a hover effect. So let's first actually include an ID for the section. So when we click on the About Us section, About Us link, it'll take us there. So I'll just have an ID of About, and then we're going to have a class of container, which is just going to center everything at a certain screen size, and then we'll have the actual About Us content. Well, then we'll actually have the ID of the About Us container. And as I mentioned, it's split into two sections. So we've got content on the left and then content on the right. So we'll just name it left and right, or about content left, which is just a H5, which says established since 1961, and the main heading, so H1, all about the surf, and then we'll have some paragraph. This is going to have the ID or class, sorry, of about P, and we'll just put some dummy text in here, so let's put about 35. And then we'll do another paragraph, we'll say lorem, say 20. Underneath that paragraph, there's a button which has the class of about btn. It just says learn more. So that's it for the left side of the content. We'll do the right side. So this is going to have an ID of about content right, and this is just going to be an image. So the source is going to be the images folder / about the surf.jpg file .jpg. This is just going to have a class actually of images. We'll just put in the surf for the alt. And that's pretty much all the content we're going to need. Let's export this now so we can include it in our app.js. So export default about, and then we'll import it here. Import about from pages. Again, it probably could be called sections, but we'll just keep it as pages. And then we'll just put the function component in here underneath the landing page. So if we go ahead and take a look at the surf now, you can see if we scroll down, there's all that content that we just created, but we've also got a really large image. So obviously we need to apply the styling now. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go in the about.css, go in our GitHub, we don't need that anymore. Go in pages, and it's about.css, grab the raw file, paste that in here, and I've just realized this is not IDs, it's actually classes. For all of these. Yeah, so, and then from here, let's go ahead and import the CSS. So we'll say import about.css, and there's our about section, which I think looks pretty good. We've also got that hover effect, and that's pretty much it for the about us section. Really nice and simple, and I think it looks pretty good. And then from here, the next section we're going to build is going to be the destination section, which is just a section which has 4 different cards. So we've got one for Australia, Hawaii, and Portugal, as well as the Maldives. But another cool feature about this section, we're going to make it interactive, so that when we click on the read me more buttons for each of the cards, it will display a modal for us. Click on this, you see it displays a modal for us, so it just gives us that extra bit of information about Australia, but it's essentially just some dummy text. And we've got a book now button. We can close this modal by clicking on the X, or if we open it up again, we can click anywhere outside of the modal and it will close it. And these buttons are specific to the cards. So if we click on Hawaii, it will display the content for Hawaii, and then it will also display the content for Portugal, as well as displaying the content for the Maldives. So a pretty cool and interactive section. Probably going to be the longest part of the video, but it's going to be a really nice section for us. We're going to learn how to use things called React Hook, which is going to give us the ability to create the modal for this section. So let's go ahead and create that section now. So we'll just close the about section, go inside our pages, so destinations.jsx. Also create the CSS file for this, so destinations.css. Head inside the JSX file, same pattern as before from React. And underneath that, we'll create the function for it. So destinations, call it destinations. We have the return. Inside of the return, we'll have a container which has the ID of destination. So then, when we click on one of the links, it will take us to that destination section. So we'll just give us an ID of destinations. And then we'll have our actual destinations container. And this is going to have a H1, which is just going to say destinations. And then underneath that, we'll have a class for each of those individual cards. So each of the individual cards that you see in our finished website. So we'll just call this cards container box. So it's just going to be the cards, and then we'll export this so we can then use it inside of the app file. So that's pretty much it for the markup. The way we're actually going to be creating these cards and the modal is actually getting the data from a file that I'm going to create in just a second, and I've also got it in the GitHub. So how this data file is going to work is it's just going to hold all of our data that we're going to need for the project. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like now. So if we go into the main file, you see we've got this file data.jsx, and this basically just has an array of objects, so each of those individual objects which have all those properties. So it's got the ID, the image, the title, the description, the extra description for the modal, and then the price that you see in the cards. So this is where our data is going to be coming from. Now, in a real life scenario, you might have something similar to this, or you might have it coming from a API. So creating it like this just makes it more dynamic. We don't have to hard code all of these, which in this case wouldn't be a bad thing, but just say we have 10, 20, 30 destinations or something similar, then trying to hard code all of that in just wouldn't work. So creating it, so by making it dynamic, we're able to add as many cards as we want. Now that might be a bit confusing, but it's going to make sense in just a moment. But first, let's just create this file so we can get all of this data. So this is going to be in the source file, and we'll call it data.jsx. Grab the raw data file from here, paste that. So that's all of our data, and then let's actually import that file so we can use it inside of our destinations file. So we're going to import destination from data file. So now we can use this. Let's first actually just name this destinations array, just so we don't confuse it with our function here. So we'll go inside the actual array itself of the data, and we'll copy that. So again, the way we're going to make this dynamic is we're going to grab this destinations array from our data file here, and then we're going to loop through it using the map method, which is then going to allow us to access all of the individual properties, which we can then insert dynamically and then create our cards. So let's go ahead and see that in action. So we'll go inside the cards container box, some curly braces, and then we'll say destinations array. So we're grabbing that array of all that from that data file, and we're going to say .map, and this is going to return an arrow function, and then as an argument we want to return the destination or the individual destination from that array. So we'll just call it destination. It's going to represent each of those individual destinations. So Australia, Hawaii, Portugal, and the Maldives. And then we can use that now to then access these properties so we can create the cards. So we'll say, so inside of this map method, we'll need another return. The first thing we're going to need to do is just create a card. So let's just give it the class of card. And this is going to need to have a key ID, otherwise it's going to throw us an error. So we'll say key, and the ID of that is going to be destination.id. And let's just clean it up a little bit. And then inside of the card, we're going to have our image, and then for the source file, we're going to have that destination image, and this is also going to have a class name, so we'll just call it card image. And then underneath the image you can see we have our title, so we'll have h1, so destination.title. Underneath that we'll have our description, so just a small bit of description there. So this is just going to be a h4. So destination.description, and then we'll also have one for the price. And you can see if I actually just dot notation this, you can see all of the properties we can access because we're mapping through it and we're using the argument of destination to give us the access to all of the properties. So we'll have one for price, and then we'll also have one for the button, which is actually going to have a function inside of this in a moment, an on-click attribute, which is going to give us that functionality to open up the modal when we click on these read me more buttons. So let's just put in here read more, and we'll work on the modal in just a sec, but let's go ahead and put our cards inside of our main file, inside of our project, so then we can actually see them. So we'll go back to our project here, go on the app.js, go under the about. Oh, sorry, first we need to actually import this. Import destinations from the destinations pages. and then we'll say destination. And that should display our destinations. And as you can see, it's got no styling at the moment, so the images are really large, but there's all of our content. So let's go ahead and just include the CSS. So we'll go on our GitHub, go in the pages, grab the CSS for the destinations, copy this, paste it, and then import that CSS file. So from here now we're going to create that functionality that when we click on these buttons here, it's going to display a modal for us for that particular destination. So it just gives us that extra bit of information for whichever box we click on. So if we just take a look at the finished example, if we want to find out some more information about Australia, we'll click on the read more and it will open the modal for us and just give us an extra bit of text. And then we can click off this anywhere outside of the modal, or if we click on Hawaii, display information about Hawaii, and then we can either click on the outside or we can click on the X. So that's what we're going to be creating. Now in this tutorial there's actually going to be two ways we're going to be creating the modal, or two different ways should I say. So the first way, which is going to be this example, is we're just going to be creating the model inside of our destinations file here, and then we're just going to be using React Hook, which I'll explain what they are in just a moment. Then toggle between displaying the modal if the read me more button is clicked, and it's going to follow a really similar pattern to this, so it's going to be dynamic, and it may sound a little confusing at first, but again I'm going to be explaining as I'm going along how it's all working, and then I'll just do an overview at the end. The first things first, let's just go ahead and create the layout for our model, for the modal. So we'll go outside the cards container box, and then we'll just have a class of modal, or a div with a class of modal. And this is essentially just going to act as like the background or the overlay, like the darkened overlay that you see when we click on these. So this background section here, now it's important that we also have this overlay div class. It's because when we click on the overlay, we want the modal to disappear. That's why we're including this. So inside of this, we'll actually have the modal container, which will be the actual, the box or the modal itself. And then inside of the modal container, we'll have the modal content, and then inside of this content we're just going to be having this similar sort of styling where we loop through an array to access the properties of the destination or the particular destination that we click on. So the way we're going to link a particular destination, which is a function which is essentially just going to take an argument of the destinations array, which we'll insert in our read me more button. So that function will trigger when we read me more button, and then we'll use the show model function to display that destination inside of the array, so then we can access that particular destination's properties, which might sound a bit confusing, but again it'll make more sense as we're going along. So we'll just create that function underneath this. So we'll say const change content, and this is going to be an arrow function, and we're actually going to insert an argument in here which is going to be called destination. Now again, the way we're inserting that particular destination is that because we're using it as an argument in here, we're going to be referencing that particular destination when we loop through it, which we've looped through using the map array of our destinations array. And then inside of the function, we'll grab the show model function from our use state, and then we'll insert an array of that particular destination that we click on. And then what we'll do is insert this into an on-click attribute inside of our button there. So on-click, this is actually going to be an arrow function. We want to change the content, and then we want to insert the destination that we map through. So this destination object that we used for all of these different sections to access those particular properties. So whenever we click now on the read me more button, it's going to access that particular destination in the destinations array, and because we're firing it off with this function of the change content, inside of that now we're using the show model function to set an array of that particular object, so whichever one it will be, and then the use state will go from an empty array, which it initially is, to then being set to a destinations array of that particular destination that we click on. So now we can access those properties just like we did in this example. Create us that card. So we'll go inside the model content, enter some curly braces, Then we'll grab the model, and we'll loop through that with a map method again, and then we'll insert the model card, so then we can access the properties. So this is going to be arrow function, and then what we'll do is just return just like we did in the other example. So we'll have a div which has the class of model card, and this also needs a key attribute, otherwise it will throw us an error. So model card.id. Inside of the model card we'll have a model wrapper, which is essentially just going to hold the content. Scroll down so we can see this a bit. So we'll have a title in here, or h1, and this is going to have modal card.title. Underneath that we'll have a class for the cross that we can click on, so it will close the modal. So we'll just call this model title button btn, and this is going to have a button which is just going to be an X. And then underneath model wrapper we'll have our image, and this is just going to be a source attribute to model card.image. Alt is just going to be, let's just put image destination, and this is also going to have a class of card image, and then we'll have a paragraph which is going to be that extra information. So this is just going to be model card.extra description, and then underneath the extra information we'll have the button, which is just going to have a class name of book now btn, the content book now. So that's essentially all we're going to need for the content to create the modal card, and all the properties and values that we're going to need. The way we're actually going to display the modal that when we click on the button is just using a simple true or false, which we're going to need the use state hook again. So the way we're going to create that is we'll just have a toggle between true or false, so that when we click on the read me more button and it turns to true, it will display the modal for that particular destination, so if Australia for example. So really simple to create. It's just going to be const, we use some destructuring, we'll call this toggle modal, and then we'll have set toggle modal, and this is just going to equal the use state hook, and it's initially going to be set to false, so it's not displaying the modal. And then when we want it to display or switch to true, we'll insert it in the change content function. We'll say set toggle modal, set it not to toggle modal, which is the initial value, again being false. So when it's not this, or not toggle modal, it will then turn to true and then show us the content. So then to display this, we're going to actually need to wrap this whole thing inside of some curly braces, so we can use that toggle variable. We're going to say toggle modal and the modal content itself, so all of this content. When it's toggled, it will show the modal, and then when it's not, it will obviously hide the modal. So let's go ahead and see if this actually works. So we'll go inside of our project. So now if I click on the read me more button, it should display our modal with that extra information, but also displaying that particular destination. So you can see there, if I click on that, it's showing us Australia, it's just giving us a bit of more information. And we can't click off it right now, so I'll just refresh this just to show that it'll show us the right destination. We'll click on this, you see it's showing us Hawaii, and then let's just check one more. Let's just check Portugal. You see it's showing us Portugal with the same image as the card, and just with that extra bit of information. So from here now, all we need to do to complete this section is just add functionality. So then we click anywhere outside of the modal, it will delete, it will close the modal, or if we click on the X, it will also close the modal. And all we need to do for that is just simply go inside all the areas that we want to apply the clicking ability, where we can click off. So for the overlay, it's just going to be this container here, or the class of modal. So we just literally add the on-click change content inside of here, and then we'll just do the exact same thing, the button or the X. So we're essentially just toggling when we click on this. So if I refresh this and then I'll open up Portugal again, we should be able to click anywhere outside of the modal here, or the overlay, and it should close the modal. As you can see, it closes the modal, and then we also have the same for the X. So we click on that, and you see that closes the modal too. Now, we're not completely done here, because something you might notice is that if I click on anywhere inside of the modal, you see it closes it, and we don't really want that functionality. We only want the functionality of the modal to close when we click outside of it, or when we click on the X. And the reason this is happening is because of something called event propagation. Now, if you guys want to learn more about what that is, I have a 2-part course on DOM manipulation, which goes into a lot more detail about event propagation, but I'll just give a brief explanation of what it is. Essentially, what event propagation refers to is just how event travels up through the document object model, or the DOM tree. And you can think of event propagation as essentially just electricity running through a wire until it reaches a destination. Now, the event needs to pass through every node of the DOM until it reaches the end, or it's forcibly stopped. So essentially, when we click on the modal here, all the events are running through each of the individual modules of the DOM tree. So the model, the outside, the overlay div, essentially all the elements all the way up to the root. And in this case, we don't actually want this to happen because it closes the modal when we click on it. So we're going to have to forcibly stop it. And the way we do that is stop it on the DOM element that will then halt that event, and we won't be able to click on the modal anymore, so it won't close. So we apply that on the model container, which essentially wraps around the whole model and all of its content. So all we need to do is add an onClick attribute, and this is going to have an arrow function, and then we want to grab the event, so we'll say or E, so we're giving that E argument, and then we say stop propagation. Again, if that sounded a little bit confusing for you guys, it's because it is a little bit more complex than I just explained. But if you guys want to find out more information about event propagation and how the DOM tree works, I do have a 2-part course which goes into a lot more in depth about all of the things I just mentioned, and I also have projects so you guys can practice those. But this now should effectively be working. So if I click anywhere on this, you see it's not closing, but if I click on the X, close, and then if I click anywhere outside of the modal, closes the modal. So that does it for this section. Let's go ahead and build the section, the newsletter section, which again is going to use the functionality of a modal, but we're actually going to be building this a little bit differently. This is going to be an actual function component instead of building it inside the one.jsx file like we did in the destinations folder here. So let's first go ahead and build out the UI for the section here. So we'll go take these off, and then we'll go for pages. Say newsletter.jsx, create letter.css. So this is actually going to be quite a simple UI. Let's first just do this import React from React. We're going to be using the use state just like we did in the previous example. So we'll just have it ready here. And then we'll say function newsletter our return fragment, and then we'll have the ID container of newsletter for our nav link. Then we'll have a class container for the newsletter, which is going to contain all of the content. And then we'll have the actual content, so newsletter content, and it's just going to be h1, which is going to say become part of the surf. And then have a paragraph with some dummy text, so we'll say Lauren 15. Then we'll have a button which is join the surf. And then let's just export this so we can use it in our app.js. Export default newsletter. Go in the app file, and then let's import it here. Oh, not an app, but newsletter. Let's have it ready. So there's our content there. See it there. Let's just copy the CSS for this. Let's go on the GitHub, grab the raw file, copy this inside there, import that file, let's access. Let's take a look at what that looks like. You can see, and that's looking pretty good. Let's also, forgot to add the class for the button. So class of newsletter content. And there's our button. So we've created the UI. Now let's create the functionality to display a login modal or sign up modal when we click on this. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to be building this model a little bit differently. We're actually going to be making it a component instead of creating it inside of the file. So we'll go inside our components folder and we'll add a new file, say modal.jsx. And then let's also create the CSS file for this. CSS and then the newsletter stuff for now. So let's just import React from the React file, and then we'll also import the CSS while we're here. And then we'll say function modal, and then we'll just create the UI for this. So in the return, we'll have an overlay. We'll have a class of overlay, which is just going to be similar to how the overlay was for this example. And then we'll have a form, the class of sign up. And then we'll have a header title. So it's just going to be just the class of header title. Inside of that, we'll have the actual H1, which is just going to say create account. And then underneath that, we'll have the cross, which is just going to be, let's just make it a paragraph. So it's just going to be a hard-coded X, and give this a class of close btn. And then we'll have the input fields. So we'll go underneath this, and we'll have a sign up field. And this is going to have an input with a class of sign up input, type of text, and then we'll also give it a name attribute for the username. So let's also give it an ID actually, username. And then let's make this required. So it's just like some validation. So you have to fill this in. And then obviously we'll have our label, which is just going to be, this is going to be the text inside of our inputs. For the label, we don't need that. We'll just have a class for it of sign up label. And then this is going to be an attribute for the username. So we just need to duplicate this 2 more times. And then the next one's going to be for the email. As well for the email. And then the last one's going to be for password. And we and do this as well. Now we actually need to write password in here, email in there, and username. So we'll export this now, so we can use it in our app file. Modal. So we'll go in our app file. Actually no. So we'll go in our newsletter, and then we'll import the modal in here. So import modal from the components folder, and we'll just insert this underneath the button. So modal. We actually need to give it some styling. So we'll go in the sources, we'll go in the components folder, CSS. Now let's go grab the CSS for this. So we'll grab the whole raw file data, paste that in here, and then let's go see what this looks like. So there's our modal there, so it's got the nice hover effects, and it looks pretty good. Now all we need to do is add the use state functionality, so that when we click on the button, this will appear. So the first thing we're going to do here is actually hide this initially. So the way we're going to do that is just passing down prop from the newsletter.jsx file to our modal. And what props essentially are is just a way to pass data and values from one component to another to get dynamic output, and essentially just work like function arguments in JavaScript and attributes in HTML. So what we want to do is pass data through our newsletter function component here to our modal. So just like we did before, we're going to be using the use state. So we're just going to create a variable, a destructured one, which is going to be the modal, and then we'll have a set modal function, and this is going to equal use state, which is just going to essentially be initially be false, just like before. And then we want to pass this variable as an attribute to the modal component here. So all we need to do is just say show modal, and this is going to equal the initial state of our modal, false. So now what we've done here is pass this variable here as a prop to our modal, so we can now use this in our modal component. We'll go in there. So to then use that, all we need to do is accept it as a property, say show modal, so we can now use that prop that we inserted in our modal here through our newsletter, and then use that variable in here. So we're just going to have some simple JavaScript here just to hide this, so it's not initially showing. And the way we're going to do that is just by simple JavaScript. We'll say if not show modal is not true, return null. And as you can see, that hides our modal, so it might be a little bit confusing, but we're essentially just saying that when the modal is not showing or it's not true, we initially want this to hide or return null, so it hides the modal, and we only want it to show when it's true. When we click on this button, then it will show the modal. And then from here, all we need to do is just create two functions, one which is going to handle that or toggle between that showing the modal and not showing the modal, and then also one for handling the close button. Click on the X, it will close the modal. So we're actually going to set those functions inside a component here. Say const modal, and then all we want to do is just set the modal to not the modal. That makes sense, so it's not false. Set the modal opposite of false, true, so it will show us the modal. Then we'll just do another one for closing the modal, so handle close button. And then we'll just set the modal again here. So we'll apply the toggle here to the button, so we'll put it inside of the button so it shows us the modal. So say on click, handle modal. And then for us to click off the modal, we'll do on close attribute, or we'll give the modal component an on close attribute. We'll call it on close, and then we'll say handle. So now we've passed it down as a prop. We'll go inside the modal, and to access that prop, we'll just create another. We'll access that attribute. So we'll say on close, and then for the X, we'll just then use the attribute here. So on click, on close. So that now should display our modal. So if we click on the join the surf club, you see it brings up our modal, and then if we click on the X, it closes the modal. Now what we also want to do is just stop that event propagation, just like we did in the previous example, and we want to apply that to this div here, which actually should be a form. So I'll just make this form, and then we'll go inside the form here. We'll add an onClick attribute, and this is going to be a arrow function, and then we just want to target the event object, just like in the previous example, and we'll say e.stop propagation, and that should really be it for our modal. So again, the way we've created this modal is first we've created a function component for the modal, given it all the JSX, and then inside of our newsletter function or section here, we've got our button, and then all we've really done is just use the use state again. We've set a variable for the modal, initially set it to false so it doesn't display, given it two functions, so then we can toggle between closing the modal or showing if it's true or not, which will display the modal. And we've also imported the modal component inside of this file, inserted it inside of our newsletter here, and then we've passed down all of these properties as props, and then for the modal to access those properties, give them as parameters here, so then we can access them and reference those wherever we need them. So we've used the onClick attribute for the cross, and then we've also got the onClick attribute to stop the propagation for the form. So that's two different ways we can create modals in React. Let's now finalize the last section, which is the footer here. This hasn't really got much functionality. It's just JSX, and then going to paste the CSS. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll go inside the pages file, footer.jsx and footer.css. And then we'll do the exact same thing. So import React from React. We'll import the CSS file too. And we'll say function footer. And we'll just return. Inside of this, we'll have a div, the ID of footer. We'll have a container class, just so it's centralized. And then we'll just put a comment here. So just say footer info detail, just because there's going to be quite a lot of JSX here. First bit's going to be the location. Yeah, location. So actually first we need to wrap it in a container. So we'll call this footer container. The first bit, as I mentioned, is going to be for the location. So we'll have footer info location, and then also foot info. And this is going to have an icon with a class of fas.map-marker-alt, and then it's going to have a div with some text. So let's say footer info location text, and then it's just going to be a span in here with some dummy text. So we'll just say lorem 4, and then we'll duplicate this a few more times. So that's for location. The second one's going to be for number. The last one's going to be for email. For info number, fa phone. Also change that. Number text. And then we'll just put a random number in here. So just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. And then for the email, footer info email. The ID or the class, sorry, for the icon is footer fa envelope -open. So this is font awesome. These icon classes. Text email. Just write a random email. gmail.com. So that's it for the footer info. Let's now create one for the footer extra details. So this detail here, and I'm just going to copy and paste from the other file, just because it would be quite a long time typing this out. So essentially just a similar sort of thing. So we've got the footer content here, back a bit. So this is going to have the footer content, and if we open this up, it's just going to be in 2 different sections. So you've got the footer content boxes, you've got the logo and the text, and you've also got all the icons, so for things like Instagram, Twitter, YouTube and Facebook, so all the socials. And then the next section is just a few little links, so it's just a UL, so just some extra few bits of links. And then the last bit is going to be for the copyright content. So I'll just go in here and say footer copyright details, and this is going to say, it's just going to have a div, sorry, copyright content container copyright content container, and it's going to have some text. So copyright text, this is going to be a paragraph, so copyright, and then we're going to have that symbol. So to create the symbol, it's just going to be and copy semicolon 2023 all rights reserved, and then we'll have an anchor tag. Instead of that, we'll say the surf, and then lastly we'll just have that little menu there. So it's just going to be footer menu ul li anchor tag. So one for home, duplicate, one for terms, duplicate that, one for privacy, policy, and then finally contact. So we'll export this file now. So we've got all the sections, and then we'll just export this. Export footer. Sorry, export default. Spell that wrong. Head into the app.js. Import that there. Import footer. And then let's see what it looks like. So there's all of the content there. Now we just need to apply the CSS. So we'll go into the GitHub, grab the footer CSS, to the raw file, copy all of this, paste it in there. Now this should complete our footer. So as you can see now, the footer's looking exactly the same as our finished example. So that's essentially it for the whole website. The only thing we need to do now is just make it responsive. So when it goes into smaller screens, we have that hamburger menu, and it shows like a sidebar. So just like we did for this modal, we're going to be making this a function component. So we'll go in the components folder, new file, and we're going to call this hamburger. So it's going to be a hamburger menu. Oh, well, we'll need a CSS, but we also need to make a JSX file. So hamburger.jsx. We'll get rid of these two. Same thing as before. So import React from React. Also import the CSS file. Hamburger.css. Then we'll say function hamburger, and then this can be quite simple really. So in the return we'll just have a div which is just going to have what's going to be the hamburger, and then inside of that we'll have 3 divs which is going to represent those 3 individual lines. So we'll insert our fragments there, and we'll have a class of hamburger, and then we'll have those 3 individual hamburger lines. So this is just going to have a class, they're all going to have a class of bar. So I'll just create 3 of those, and that's all we're going to need for the hamburger menu. So let's just export this. Default hamburger. And then we're going to be using this on our nav bar. So let's go ahead and import that. Import hamburger from the hamburger file. And we're also going to use the use state for this. So use state. And just like we did in the previous examples, we're initially going to have a variable which is just going to be either true or false, and then have a function which is just going to fire off between true or false. So it may look a little bit confusing at first, but it will make sense as I'm going along, and I will explain. So we'll just create a variable, use the destructuring. So we'll say is nav expanded, and then we'll have set is nav expanded. And this is initially going to be set to false, and then we'll have our function we can use. So const handle click, and say set nav is expanded to not is expanded. And then what we'll do is I'll just make this a bit smaller so we can start seeing this. So you see we can't actually see the hamburger at the moment because we need to insert it into our JSX here. So we'll go after the logo, and then we'll have a class of hamburger, and then we'll insert the hamburger in here. And we can't actually see them at the moment because we need to include the CSS for our hamburger there. We'll grab the raw file of the components folder for our hamburger, and we'll grab the raw file for the hamburger CSS file, paste that in here, and take a look at our project. And as you can see, there's our cross now. Now this hasn't actually got any functionality yet because we need to include all of that, but there's essentially our hamburger menu at the moment. So firstly we want to use the function that we created here to show us the hamburger menu. So we'll just say on click equal handle click, and the way we're going to show the sidebar menu when we click on the cross, or when we click on the hamburger, sorry, we're going to be using a conditional operator, or sometimes referred to as a ternary operator, which is like a JavaScript operator that sort of takes 3 operands. So there's a condition followed by a question mark and then an expression to execute if the condition is either true or false. So that might sound a little bit confusing, but it's actually pretty simple. It's essentially just like an if-else statement in one line. So we're going to be including that inside of our navbar here. So initially the class is set to navigation menu, but inside our navbar CSS we've got this navigation expanded. So what this essentially will do is that when this is true, when we click on the hamburger menu, it will display the sidebar menu or display a block, which will then display our side menu in the UI here. So again, the way we do that is in our navbar here, inside of our nav tag, all we want to do is still inside the class name. We want to insert some JSX, so we're going to say is nav expanded. So that's the condition. If that's true, then we want the navigation. Then we want the class of navigation.menu expanded to show, and then in the colon, and then the other side of this is what we want to be false. So if we don't want this to show, we'll just set it back to the navigation menu. So currently right now our isNav expanded is set to false, so we can't see our menu. But if I click on this now, you see it shows our sidebar menu. That's because we fired off our handle click function, which is turning our isNav expanded to true because it's initially set to false. And then because it's true inside of our ternary operator here, it's going to show us nav menu expanded, which is why we can see it. And then if we click off this, it's returning our sidebar nav false, which then makes this false, which then just shows us the navigation menu, which essentially just hides the menu. So again, another really cool true or false functionality, just using the use state. Now the way we're going to make it a hamburger menu instead of a cross is, firstly we want to pass down the variable into our hamburger menu there, so we can use it in the hamburger menu. So we pass it down as a prop. So we'll just call this is open equals is nav expanded, and inside our hamburger menu, and then we'll accept it as a prop, and we'll say is open. So now we can use that variable inside of our hamburger menu here. And then the way we're going to make it either a cross or a hamburger menu is again using the ternary operator. So just like we did it before, we'll go inside the class and then we'll insert some JSX, and then we'll say is open. If this is set to true, and show us the class of bar. If not, show us the class of burger. So as you can see, it's messing up a little bit there, but essentially because it's initially set to false, it's going to show us the hamburger menu. So all we need to do is copy these and paste it in each of the individual ones. And as you can see, that's displaying our hamburger menu. Now the reason it's doing this is because if we take a look at the CSS for these, you can see for each of the individual bars there's a transform rotate on them. So that when we click on this and is open is set to true, each of those individual bars, so either the first, second or third, will rotate to a certain degree, which is why it will give us that cross when we click on this. And then when it's not, it's just set to burger, which is just going to be reverting them back to this style here. So that's how we're doing that. All we're doing is just essentially using the ternary operator to switch between these two different values depending on if it's true or false. So this should now complete our hamburger menu. So if I click on this, you see it displays a cross and it shows our sidebar menu. And then if I click off it, you see it reverts back to a hamburger and it closes off our menu. And then before we get ready to deploy this, let's just, we actually need to hide the hamburger menu when it's in a full screen size, so we can't see it like that. Just put this back, and then to do that, just uncomment this. So that will hide it when it's on the larger screen. And then want to include the waves for the section between the about us section and the destination section. So this section here, just to give it that nice little effect. And the way we're doing that is we've already got the CSS for in each of the pages. So all we need to do is just include it inside the JSX. So in the about us section, go underneath all of this, and then just include a class of wave 2. That will give us the wave there. And I'll explain these classes in just a sec, but let's just include it for the destination. So for the destination, go right inside of here. So this will have wave, or just a class of wave. And that's going to give us that little effect between the two sections, just so it's like keeping up with the theme of surfing. And essentially the way I've done this is if we go inside one of the CSSs for this, find the wave class. All it essentially is just a div which just has position absolute inside of it, and then I've used the clip path, which just gives it that oval shape, which then gives us a shape of like a wave. So this has the background color of this section, and this has the background color of that section, and I think it's just a cool little feature. You don't have to do it, but a nice little addition. So now we've finished our project, it's finally time to deploy, which again we'll be using the sponsor of this video, Hostinger. So we'll head over to the Hostinger website now. So we're on the Hostinger website, and as you can see, they've already got a deal running. So they've got up to 70% off a hosting deal, plus an additional 3 months free at a really low price. And you've also got all the little perks and benefits I mentioned at the start of the video. So you've got free domain registration, free website migration, as well as 24 customer service support, and also got that 30-day money-back guarantee. Also, in addition to all of this, if you use the link in the description plus my code lab at checkout, you get an additional 10% off on top of this deal and any other deal that you choose. I've chosen the name thesurf.site. All we need to do to deploy our custom website is just go inside the file manager, go inside the public.html file. We don't need this file, so we'll delete this one, and then all we need to do is just paste our file inside of here. So we'll go back inside VS Code, and I'll show you guys how we can condense the React project we created, so we can just drop the file in here. So we'll head back into VS Code. You can see at the bottom here inside of the terminal that the development build is not actually optimized to create a production build. So the file that we're going to be using, all we need to do is just run this command. So we'll just copy this, another git bash, we'll cd into the surf, paste that command in there, run that command, and that should build a folder for us called build, which you should see displayed up here. And as you can see, there's the build file. So all we need to do is just drag and drop this file inside of the Hostinger drag and drop, which I showed you just a second ago, and that's literally all we need to do. So I'll go back inside Hostinger now and drop the file inside there. So we'll grab the build file, drop that in there, and that will start uploading our 12 files in there. Sorry, we need to actually copy all of these and paste them in here, and then just delete that build file because it won't actually access all of these files. So once that's all done and saved, we'll go back inside the dashboard for our site here, and that should now be running. So if I click on this and preview our website, you can see that's showing our website. If I scroll down, it's got all of our sections. It's got the destination section, which will have the modal. So if I click on the read me more, it displays our modal. Click off it, and then it should also be doing that for our newsletter section. So as you can see, it's running just as it should, and it's really as simple as that. To use Hostinger, we literally just go create a domain name, open up the dashboard, go inside the file manager. If you've got a custom website, just paste it inside the file manager, and it's all ready to go. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thanks again to Hostinger for sponsoring the video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.